Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to Watchbox, and thanks for logging on. If you love this watch, email me, tmosso@thewatchbox.com. It's in the description below. It is your purchase and pricing email question line for buying this or any watch you see on any Watchbox platform. Please reach out to me directly. Email tmosso@thewatchbox.com for pricing. Today, we are discussing the second generation Omega Speedmaster 57. So the original version came out in 2013. It was 41.5 millimeters with automatic winding. This version came out in 2022, and it is 40.5 millimeters in diameter in steel, and now manual winding to make it thinner. So it's 40.5 millimeters in diameter in stainless steel by 13.2 millimeters thick. From lug tip to lug tip, 49.5 millimeters with a 20 millimeter spacing between the lugs. This vintage model features a sandwich dial that is exclusive to this vintage simulated patina model. The other ones have applique indices without the sort of patina fade effect. So this is a unique dial for this unique model within the second generation Speedmaster 57 family. We'll throw it on my wrist, which is 16 centimeters circumference. And you can see it's still a large watch. Being almost 50 millimeters lug to lug definitely has a lot of wrist presence, but it also means that the lower limit for wearing this watch well is probably 15 centimeters in circumference. Now it is thinner than before, and it will fit more easily underneath the cuffs, although the shape of it, never mind the thickness, but the shape of it is not super conducive to clearing a really thin cuff, but you should loosen up if your sleeves are that tight. I kid. It should be fine with most shirt sleeves, and it will be fine with all jacket cuffs. Again, wrist as small as 15 centimeters circumference, you're good to go. The strap's a fascinating piece. It is a brand new Omega factory strap. First, it has a dégradé or fade, a smoked fumé type effect. You can see there's a gradient, it's darker at the edge. It has a sort of vintage style contrasting binding stitch, and then it's a bonded strap rather than a stitched strap. You have this little binding stitch, but the rest of it's held together by adhesive. So there's no stitching pattern, which creates a thinner, seamless aesthetic, and you can see this really is a new strap. We also have a Omega buckle in steel. Note the combination of media blasting on the top of the buckle, satination on its side, and then polish on the pin, the logo, and then the bevel. So an interesting array of 3 finishes on the buckle alone. Now on the case, you can see that this is inspired by the original 1957 CK2915. Before Omega went full vintage re-edition, back in 2013, they launched the Speedmaster 57 as sort of a modern reimagining of what the original Speedmaster would have been had it survived the modern era in more or less its original form. So this is not strictly a retro watch, it's more of a thought experiment. And you can see that it is substantial, although it has the minimal beveling of the lugs, the squared off ends. There's no lyre-style lug profile here. There's no crown guard, no pusher guard or asymmetrical case. We have pump style pushers. You can see that although it is a vintage watch in some regards, mostly sort of a vintage effect, it's not strictly vintage styled, as we have the modern Speedmaster Omega and marquee logos. All of the Omega symbols here are the modern variety. And then you can see on the reverse side the manual wind caliber 9906. Now I mentioned earlier that this vintage inspired version that has the sort of ecru patina, it is the only sandwich dial. The other ones feature metallic dials with a sunburst pattern and applied indices. Here we get a Panerai-like sandwich where there's a stencil over a luminescent base, and so the stencil has the indices. You can see how they have depth, and then the lume sort of shines out eerily from within the stencil. You can also see that this is actually a triple register chronograph, even though it has a twin register design. There's a mono counter over at 3 o'clock that is both chronograph minutes and chronograph hours, the co-axial and superimposed. We've got a vintage inspired broad arrow hour hand, and we do actually have a couple of fun features here. One is this time zone feature that allows me to change my time zone even as the chronograph and the minute and the seconds hand of the time continue to track. Now you can see I'm able to drive the date forward or backwards as I travel east or west. If I pull the crown out to one more stop, that's second position, now hacking seconds is engaged, and I can set the watch against a reference time to the second. Now you can see how when I reset it, I reset these coaxial hands on the mono counter at 3. You can also see that the dial has a weathered texture, almost sort of a granular profile when you get really close. We'll do a lume shot here. And the watch is quite well loomed. For something with a patina style lume, sometimes these don't glow well. This one does. Turning it all over, let's first take a look at the sapphire. It is a sapphire, but it has a dramatic camber and boxed profile so that it looks a little bit like a vintage plexi, and you can see that there's a historically inspired dot over 90 on the tachymeter scale, and the tachymeter is probably best known for being used to gauge the speed of a race car over a kilometer. That's what's generally intuited when you see a tachymeter with a base 1000, though if you're really good with mental decimals and conversion factors, you could theoretically gauge the speed of anything over any distance. Flipping it all over, we do have this new manual wind movement. Again, the original Speedmaster 57 to 2013 had automatic winding. It was also untenably thick, and Omega's realized across its model line it has too many watches that are too thick for their diameter. So one of its solutions has been to pare down. Less is more. It's all 50 meters water resistant. And then we have a full balance bridge with a free sprung balance for shock tolerance. We have a 60-hour power reserve, courtesy of twin mainspring barrels. And the twin barrels also ensure that there's not a variation, or not a really big variation, in balance, amplitude, or timing, as a twin barrel movement can have a flatter torque curve than a single barrel movement for better timekeeping at both ends of its power reserve, highly wound and highly unwound, as well as flat through the middle. Now you'll also note that there is a silicone hairspring, anti-magnetic balance, staff balance, and escapement. So this watch is a master chronometer certified for power reserve, chronometry, water resistance, shock resistance, and then magnetism to over 15,000 Gauss, which is extraordinary. So this is basically an A magnetic watch. Now, the master chronometer standard was created by Omega and the Swiss Federal Institute of Metrology, but it's an open standard. Anyone can certify a watch if they meet the measure, which is why Tudor is now beginning to master chronometer certify its watches. Omega was first. Now, of course, we also have a tri-level co-axial escapement, which means this watch is able to meet the COSC standards, the master chronometer standards beyond that. It improves the power reserve, reduces the maintenance requirements, which is why Omega now offers 5-year warranties, and improves chronometry. And of course, this system, which you can actually see if you get close with a light and a loop, invented by British watchmaker George Daniels in the 70s, and industrialized by Omega starting in 1999. Now, the chronograph engagement uses a column wheel. You can see the column wheel through a skeletonization in the bridge. It has a very positive action. Really feels and sounds great, and that's the benefit of a column wheel as opposed to a cam. There's also a vertical clutch. So when you start the chronograph, look at the seconds hand. You can see how it doesn't jump into action. It starts seamlessly. That's because there's no play in a vertical clutch. Also, because there's no meshing of gears, you can leave the vertical clutch running full-time with no additional wear and tear. So if you just like having seconds at center, run the chrono, no hazard. You just need to remember to wear it every day because the power reserve will be reduced. Remember, standard power reserve is about 60 hours. Probably want to cut that in half if you have the chronograph running full time, and it beats away at 25,200 vibrations per hour, which is a silicon hairspring rate within the Swatch group. This does have that. It pivots on 45 joules with blackened and polished screws, as well as a spiral arabesque Côte de Genève satin on the wheels, engine turning on the base plate, and you can see there's a lovely mirrored bevel internally. Although it is applied mechanically, it is still attractive. So reach out to Team Mosso at thewatchbox.com for purchase and pricing details.